Good morning, I'm here in Minsk, Belarus, of course the capital, Belarus. And today I want to talk about Russia and Belarus and just give a bit of a comparison between the two, yeah? Because they're quite different countries. There's a lot of similarity in the core mentality, but a lot of differences as well. So I want to go through some of those today. Let's start with Belarus. Belarus is a small country. Belarus is very homogenous. Belarus has essentially one ethnicity, essentially one mentality, and a real shared history, just little bits of, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Lithuanian genetics, but it's kind of Belarusian. Yep. Russian is the language. Yeah, some people want to speak a bit of English or a bit of Belarusian as well, but you have this kind of homogeneity about the place. Let me turn you around. I'll just show you what I'm looking at. Let me zoom a little bit, fix it up a bit for you guys. And there's only like 9.2 million people, something like that. And it's very centrally controlled, so it's still kind of more communist, I guess, in that sense. The government has a strong hand on a lot of things here, also not on some things, but certainly a lot stronger hand than Russia. That would be for sure and certain. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's a lot safer here. There's not just any dude rocking up, crossing the border like you can get a little bit in Russia. Russia's a bit wilder. It's much bigger, it's more unruly. You can't really control it. And it's certainly not homogenous, although of course you've got ethnic Russians, a lot of variation within those. And of course you've got different tribes, varying degrees of Asian, and entire oblasts that are dedicated to one religion, one race, essentially, almost entirely. So you've got, Russia's not even really like a country, it's more like the Soviet Union still, in a sense, and it's just all these kind of oblasts. Oblast is just the word for like state, essentially, or regional state. You got like 82 oblasts all in together. Some are Russian, some are all kinds of stuff. Obviously Chechnya is one of the, Dagestan as well, kind of the two best known, probably in the far south there in the Caucasus. But you also have a lot of other ethnicities floating around as well, right? So you got this big complicated beast, complicated, yeah? It's a complicated country. Just holding it together is difficult, whereas holding Belarus together is easy. Yeah, Belarus is very stable in that sense. Obviously the US had a really good crack at overthrowing a few years ago. It didn't work, but you can see now the government's really cracked down on that. That's not going to happen again. I think it won't advance that far this time. They've really gotten into the early stage detection. I won't say any more on that. Whereas Russia's just changed recently too. I'm filming this August 24, and Russia's just become super strict. They're even turning away some Westerners, doing phone checks, this kind of stuff on the way in, which can happen in Belarus as well. But a French guy I know just got turned away. He was living in Russia, just left for a bit, came back, his car, apartment, bank account with rubles there, and he got turned away at the border. I won't get too sidetracked on that. Maybe I'll add a bit at the end of the video. But but traditionally Russia's been a lot looser. Things aren't followed up in Russia. People don't do their jobs. No one's watching you. You know what I mean? Whereas Belarus, people follow up. You're known. You know what I mean? So it's a very different situation. Russia's very much like the Wild Wild West in that regard, and you can't control it. It's just a big unruly beast. Whereas Belarus is kind of the opposite. In terms of core mentality, Belarus, I think because of its homogeneity, they definitely have a very much a strong sense of certain civil duties, politeness, be clean, this kind of stuff, and it does make for a very pleasant first impression and surface level impression of the country. Russians are a bit more mixed in this regard. They do have this a little bit as well. I think Russians get a bit of a bad rap because you do see a few that are a bit loud and unruly on holidays. But your average middle class Russian in a first or second tier city in Russia is pretty civilized. They're pretty similar to Belarusians, really. They just got a wider variation. They got some rougher ones and just a bit more volatile, it's a bit more unpredictable. Russia. It's not much wilder than a Western country, to be fair, but maybe a little bit, but not that much. But it's a lot less predictable. You don't know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? There's just a lot more variation between people, whereas Belarus, a lot more homogenous. Certainly that social control from a social norm perspective is very strong in Belarus. Belarusians are very anti-violence, I would say. You really don't see much at all. Unless there's a woman hitting a man. I'll get into that another time. There's not a lot of violence here. Russia, not a lot either, but it can happen. And you can. I remember I was in Yekaterinburg and there must have been 20 people and one guy was just trying to hit people randomly. So you do get this idiocy in Russia, but it's only a small percent of the population, yeah? Like, Russia's pretty decent, the people are pretty decent for the most part. But you do get a little bit of this kind of drunken thuggery. So you just got to watch yourself a little bit late at night. Nothing major. But it's got to be a bit careful. Whereas Belarus, you probably don't. You can just sleep on the footpath, no one will bug you. Someone might even put a blanket on you. Maybe. And someone might steal the blanket. Probably not. Probably not, to be fair. So yeah, Russia's a bit more wild and unruly. It's got to be a little bit more careful, but it's not dangerous. It's absolutely livable. It's fine, really. It gets a bit rougher in the south, like Krasnodar or Stavrodon. I've heard a few stories coming out of there, but again, nothing really major. You're just sensible and just, you know. Whereas, yeah, Belarus is a lot more calm, on average, for sure. I think Russians have a really strong sense of identity, and even non-ethnic Russians often share this sense of national identity inside of Russia, which I think is very interesting. Sometimes they don't, but they often do. I think they have a stronger sense of identity than Belarus does, on average, yeah, just on average. And that would come back to Russia being an empire, although a weakened one in 2024. But they have that empirical mindset, kind of like an American would, in a sense. Similar kind of mentality that goes with it. And I guess Australia, although we're not an empire, we're very much owned by an empire, but we still have that empire self-esteem, I guess. And I guess the Russians kind of have that a little bit. Of course, you get, again, I'm just talking averages, yeah. But Belarus has that a little bit less, for sure and certain. So that's a big difference in the mentality as well, I think. But both are quite hospitable and will generally be quite decent with you, you know what I mean? So they share that in common. They share a lot of the old Soviet stereotypes of a bit gloomy and, these kind of Soviet stereotypes. They share these quite a bit, that mentality. So in a lot of ways they are very similar when you dig down a bit deeper. I'd say you're probably less likely to get scammed by Belarusian. Not that Russians are particularly scamish, but the problem with Russia, I think, a big part is, there are formal scams and there are a really horrible bureaucracy. The bureaucracy works better in Belarus, although it's still bad, but works a lot better than it does in Russia. That's one big difference, and that's actually part of the reason why I was in Belarus to start off with, just because I was able to get a visa in a reasonable amount of time. The migration check was 3 weeks here, whereas in Russia it was 3 months. And when they say 3 months, it's like, fuck, 3 months could mean 3 years. Jesus, what 3 months? What has to be done in 3 months? Like, really? So yeah, bureaucracy there is notably worse. But then also, you have that freedom in Russia because no one cares. Again, it's a bit different now after what happened in Moscow a few months ago. I've heard a lot of stories of people getting thoroughly checked at the borders, which wasn't happening before, yeah? When I went this time last year, no one gave a fuck. Whatever, just whatever. I was going to say don't break anything, but they don't even care, just whatever. Like, no one cares. It's your business. And Belarusians have this, at a cultural level, have a similar thing. That's your business, not mine. Yeah? Your business. So for example, the other day, I got stung by a wasp, right? So I was on the platform and I bought a whole lot of fruit and vegetables and a fucking wasp crawled out of the bag. It was hiding in the celery, I think. Bit me. It's like, you fucker. So I'm like, well, that hurt. So let's, I just squeezed it quickly to get the stinger out in case the stinger was left behind and any kind of excess venom, And I'm like, well, I better Google this because I've never been stung before. I wonder what this means. Like, just obviously basic first aid on myself. And it's like, some percentage are allergic, 3% are allergic or something. It's like, oh, that's not much, but if I'm allergic, that'd be pretty fucked, wouldn't it? So I'm like, all right, I better take my ass up to an apteca on the street, right? So I was on the metro. And if anything happens, I should be okay. Like, if I get a bit dizzy or something, I'll just lie down and someone will probably help me, whatever. I'm just being practical, right? So it's like, all right, I got up, got onto the street. I was feeling a bit funny. Like, I don't know if it had pinched it stung a nerve or something, but I was feeling a bit funny. I'm like, shit, yeah, I don't feel 100% here. Like, the sting itself didn't really hurt. It was just a bit sore, nothing, 1 out of 10 pain or something, But I was getting a bit of a cold sweat. Like, when I say a bit of a cold sweat, I mean a lot. It's like, oh shit, is this my psychology worrying, or is this actual problem? It's like, fuck, all right. So I went to the Apteka, and by this stage, I'm like really quite cooked. I'm like, so I sat on the Apteka floor. The Apteka's just pharmacy, right? So I sat on the floor, right? I wonder where they're from. Maybe Latin America. Oh, they might have come over with the visa situation. Now they've freed up the visas for people crossing the land border. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so I sat down there and they just ignored me. And then eventually I got up and just said, what do you offer wasp stings? And she got like a cream. And it's like, well, it's not the sting itself I'm worried about, it's an allergic reaction. And then they got like an allergy tablet. It's like, oh, give me one of those. So I had one of those, and I'm really dizzy at this stage, right? I actually sat down just in case I was passing out, because I was getting really close to it. But again, I think it was just my brain playing tricks a bit on me. It's hard to say. So I sat down, I'm just sweating like crazy and quite dazed. And they're not doing anything. They're not saying, you okay? Blah, 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 I'll get you some water. Like, there's no actual care there at all. It's just, you do your thing, I do mine. I'll sell you something, blah, blah, blah. It was kind of weird. Now, Belarusians can be very helpful as well, yeah? But I was kind of surprised in that situation. Like, in Australia, they'd check on you. It's like, fuck, you gonna die, mate? Or I'd be like, I should be all right, just blah, blah, blah. But they just didn't do anything. And I'm sitting in the middle of the floor, yeah? Like, I'm not like in the corner or something. Yes, there's a bit of that kind of, you look after yourself, I'll look after myself. Don't bug me, I won't bug you. This kind of very Soviet mentality. So that's here as well as in Russia. Look, honestly, overall, the food quality in Belarus is just higher. Now I'm talking fresh food, like actual produce. Better quality, man. Maybe except for seafood, because Russia will have it fresh, whereas here it tends to be frozen. But outside of that, the quality of food in Belarus is definitely higher than Russia. Again, fresh food. I'm not talking about restaurants. Restaurants, obviously Moscow is going to have more options than Minsk. It goes without saying. But yeah, the quality of fresh food here, they don't really have a market culture in Russia. Whereas in Belarus, you do get these markets. Obviously the big one, Kamarovka here in Minsk. You got a good sized one in Mogilov, good sized one in Gomel. So they're a bit more into food here. Maybe, although I don't hear it from people, but I can see it, that the markets exist. Whereas Russia, yeah, you're often left with your little corner store with very mangy looking fucking soft carrots sitting there, you know what I mean? I'm sure there's places to go, but I didn't find them. So, quality of food's probably a bit higher here. Obviously famous for dairy here in Belarus. What are some big differences? Let me think. Russia and Belarus. I think green space as well. Russia has more variety in landscape, obviously. Belarus is like just one big flat paddock with some forests, a lot of forest. But the cities themselves are probably a bit greener. Here, like Minsk is definitely greener than Moscow. Minsk, yeah, it has a lot more parks and more money's put into this kind of stuff. Obviously, again, that kind of comes with that stronger government, more centralized control, and things are very clean. Like you'll notice, like there's just nothing broken. If one of these things breaks, I'll just replace it. You know, the rubbish is picked up. Like it's just how it is. People pick up their own rubbish. You got this self-control mechanism, but the government also has people out cleaning as well. So yeah, I think here they definitely watch you more here if you're a foreigner. Like you can be followed. It's nothing like, it's not scary. They're not trying to like fucking start a cold war or some bullshit. Like they just want to know that you're not going to fuck with them, right? They couldn't give a shit what you do, honestly. Just don't break the law and don't overthrow us. That's their attitude. The rest, whatever you want, mate. Just don't bother us about it, right? But yeah, you can get followed here in Belarus, but it's obvious. It's obvious, yeah. But in Russia, as I say, no one follows up on anything in Russia. No one cares. No one does their job. Like, that's just how it is. Registrations and that kind of, no one follows up, no one gives a fuck. Here, they give a fuck. They'll do that registration because they know there's problems if they don't, right? Just as an example, but it spreads to everything else, bureaucratic as well. I think in Russia, there's a lot more economic variability as well. Like in Belarus, yeah, you have the rural-urban divide a little bit, like Minsk is a bit richer. But I think Russia, you have a lot poorer versus richer areas. That's both cities and then also within regions as well, right? You just have a lot more, capitalism kicked in there. So they've generated wealth, and then some people have benefited, some people benefited not so much, right? Whereas Belarus, like, most people are earning within 20% of what anyone else earns. So it's still kind of pretty communist in that regard, and most big businesses are either owned or influenced heavily by government, whereas in Russia you have a lot more private wealth, a lot more complicated economic structure in Moscow than in Minsk, which allows for greater specialization, greater productivity, and therefore greater salaries. There's still a lot of low salaries in Moscow, but there's high ones as well. Whereas Minsk, as I say, everyone kind of earns within 20-30% of each other, unless you're exposed to certain sectors, which are kind of these glamour sectors. Obviously IT traditionally has been one of those. That's changed a little bit, but still it's the same really on a relative basis, although it's a bit smaller. So yeah, you got a lot more variability. Also a lot more migration in Russia. People just wander in, essentially. It's a lot like the US in reality. Whereas Belarus, not so much. You're getting a lot more people now, like Chinese, Arabs, Africans. Like, you're getting a lot coming now, but it's mainly through studying and tourism. I don't think many are moving permanently, although some will, but there's not like organized clusters. Like in the West, the people who control our countries bring in waves from the same country, right? They orchestrate the whole thing. Whereas here, you don't have that, although you do have people still entering, but they're doing it of their own volition a little bit more. So yeah, you don't have that like you do in Russia. So what that means in Russia is that, yeah, you have good areas and bad areas, like a Western country, right? Areas that you want to go to, areas you probably don't want to go to. Whereas Belarus, yeah, you got some rough areas, like there's in the far kind of southeast, and also a bit in the west as well, near Green City. It gets a bit ghetto, but Minsk is generally pretty middle class the whole way through, whereas Moscow, you're going to get the good and bad areas. It's more clearly defined and more clearly differentiated. That's definitely how it is. More likely to maybe like have problem, I don't know, getting your deposit back from a landlord, for example, in Russia than in Belarus. Belarus used to have a problem. I know guys have been ripped off before in Belarus too, but more likely to happen in, say, Russia, for example. And then you got in Russia, you got like heavier dudes that'll try to move in on your business potentially as well. Whereas here it's mainly just the government that will get involved in some way. But it could just be, I know a guy who owned a shop and a few franchise, like the same branded shop, and they just called him up and say, put something on your menu that's to do with Belarus. So we just made a Belarusian burger. Just changed the name of the chicken burger, and that was their influence. But they may seek ownership, partial ownership, this kind of stuff if it gets too big. But if it's just a mum and dad size business, they really don't care. But if you do get some size about you, you're probably going to be sharing it on some level. Is the reality. But most guys don't come here to do business. Obviously, I mean, you do get naive people thinking they can come here and work, but this doesn't work that way. The salaries are just so much lower than Western, even when you adjust for prices. Whereas Russia, you can actually get... I met a guy, this is a story and a half for you guys. So I was getting my Russian tourist visa, I was in Brest, and fuck me, was the queue insane, right? And I could see all these factions of power and people sticking together and whatever. And I started speaking to a few guys, just trying to get a bit of a crew together, because I could tell this isn't going to be orderly. And I met this guy from Cuba, right? He was a retired Cuban spy. This is his story anyway. We ended up sharing a hotel room together that night because we had to queue for 24 hours and we're mining each other's spot coming. And he had a job lined up in Moscow, working full time in a restaurant, Spanish restaurant. Obviously, he speaks Spanish. And he had a contract, and he was going to get paid. I think it was $2,600 US a month, which is not bad. That's after tax. After tax, yeah. And then Russian prices, it's like you ain't earning that in Belarus, mate. 2,600, that is programming salary. Like, it's hard to get over, 800 clear here. That's a pretty good managerial role. There'll be some variation, and if you're exposed to different industries, again, maybe you can get over 1,000, 1,200, that kind of, maybe even 1,500 if you're speaking English in a crypto company, this kind of shit. But other than that, where should we go? Maybe we'll go, actually I really need to get on that metro. I might go this way with you guys. So the point of that story was that this guy had a job lined up for $2,600 after tax US dollars in Moscow. The same job wouldn't be a third of that in Minsk. But then, the bottom here is a bit better off than the bottom would be in Moscow. Well, it's just that everyone here's at the bottom, essentially. So, if you want to make money, like, Moscow is a place to go. It's the New York of the Soviet world, It's where you go, the hopes and dreams, and deep economic system in place, functional market system in place, which can allow that wealth generation. That's a big difference, and that's why Moscow is such a draw, Like, you go to Moscow, every second metro station, it's just heaps of these seedy-looking dudes from fuck knows where hanging out, you know what I mean? Like, you just got that kind of thing there, where it's that land of opportunity, which creates that kind of unruly economic migration, which Belarus doesn't quite have as much at all. It's a bit more sleepy, a bit more chilled, to say the least. So, look, there's some differences. Girls, you always wonder about girls. Probably not that different. Belarusian girls are probably a bit more polite on the surface than Russian girls are. I think the same basic rules apply in both countries in terms of what girls are available and when and why. I think it's fairly similar in that regard. Maybe Belarusian girls are a fraction sweeter on the surface, but then Russian girls probably like men a bit more than Belarusian girls do. Whereas in Belarus, there's not really a culture of liking men that much, especially with young girls. They've kind of got this kind of weird, anxious, asexual. Sorry, that cut out again. My phone's getting pretty full. I've made a lot of videos today. In Russia, the girls are probably a bit more interested in men in general than compared to here in Belarus, but not that different, I'm talking like a marginal difference. The differences aren't that much between the two countries in terms of the girls. The girls here might look a fraction better on average in Belarus. Depends where you are, though. That's the thing. Like, Russia has so much variability. In some places, the girls look good. Some places, not so much. Kind of depends. So there you go. And also, look, I think rents are lower in Belarus. Like, rents are definitely lower in Belarus. And then food. Base level food is probably cheaper in Russia, to be honest. But then Russia gets more expensive because it has more options. You can trade up and do more things at a higher price, especially in Moscow. Whereas in Minsk, it's kind of, you don't have as many options to trade up. Anyway, guys, I'm getting on the metro. It's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion today between Belarus and Russia. If you think I missed anything, do let me know.